Now, this is one of my favorite books here. This is Culture and Value. This is the most easy thing to understand. Straight from his notebooks, remarks that are not tortured, and they're just his attitudes. And finally you can understand the guy, because he's not doing philosophy, he's just confessing things to his attitudes about things. And this is Wittgenstein with his guard down. You know, imagine that you're just one of his friends and you could hear him talk. Now, a really good resource for Wittgenstein would be his student notes. Students published his lecture notes many, many years after his death. They perhaps reconstructed them. 40 years after his death, you have these students coming out with lecture notes. For example, Alice Ambrose has her lecture notes from 1932 to 1935 of what she was taught by Wittgenstein. And these are very accessible because it's the student telling you what she heard and what she understood of it. The best way to understand these is a testimony of what they were hearing. Probably what happened is these were a bit sanitized, like the student would have the lecture notes and then 40 years later people have written about what Wittgenstein meant. And they went back through their notes and tried to make that congruent with what the other scholars had understood, I would assume. But in any event, if you're looking for ways to understand Wittgenstein outside this course, Culture and Value and the student lecture notes are very good. Another one here is that I used a lot in my book was Lectures and Conversations on Aesthetics, Religious Belief, and Psychology. This also is student notes and conversations that the guy had about this subject. Here's lectures on the foundations of mathematics. This is good if, rather than read what Wittgenstein has to say about mathematics, read what his students thought they heard about it. You'll find this book to be 10 times easier to understand than his remarks on the foundations of mathematics. There's also a book called Philosophical Occasions, and this just has a bunch of different stuff in it. It has G.E. Moore, the professor at Cambridge, would go and attend Wittgenstein's lectures and would sit in and listen to him. He started writing about this new stuff Wittgenstein was saying, and I think there's also some lecture notes in here, and there's some other things, conversations and so forth. Finally, Conversations and Biography. O.K. Bosma, he knew Wittgenstein toward the end of his life, 1949 to 1951, and he talked about the conversations he had with him and his experience with them. It's a little testimonial. These kinds of books I just eat up. I love them. Very good source on Wittgenstein. And then, of course, what you have assigned for you are the best in the biography. I'm a believer that to know Wittgenstein, you have to know his life. I'm making you learn this man's life. You can see something from it. And I want you to see not only the philosophy, but I want you to see other things too, particularly the way he is. And I want to talk a little bit about the value of sincerity in life. The guy values sincerity. I was talking to someone the other day about how I hate in political science that sincerity isn't valued anymore. Sincerity and virtue, what's valued is something called rational choice. You know, everyone wants to be like Machiavelli. There was a story once of a professor who got hired, and they asked, what kind of computer do you need? And the professor, being trained in political science, said, well, I need this really, really high-powered computer, and gave reasons for it, why they wanted the university to buy him the really, really high-powered computer. And he was amazed that the university was so good-natured that they did buy him that. Because in fact, he said he never needed it. He was gaming the situation. He figured if he came in high, they'd give him the next level. And so what you have to do is try to behave toward people in the way that Congress behaves toward budgeting. And you have to try to maximize your selfishness. And Wittgensteinians would hate that. They would always just simply want you to be sincere. And you can get this, what this guy's like, and how sincerity is so important to him. He doesn't like vanity. You're going to find out later in his life that he's a professor at Cambridge, and he's going to hate it because it's fake. Being a don at these universities, particularly in philosophy and political science and in law schools, it's all contrived. It's constructed and it's contrived. And he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the conferences, he doesn't like the vanity and those kind of masks that people put on, their bow ties. And he doesn't think philosophy is really solving any real problems anyway.
Wittgensteinians don't like pretense. We don't campaign. We have other flaws. We're insufferable, for sure. But being fake is something we don't like.
The way that the world actually is actually opposite of that. Everyone likes pretense. Everyone likes charade. And it's interesting, this is another lesson you can get from it. That's why I'm making you read this. It's something different. Along with the intellectual ideas, there's a different value system. And when we get into talk about religion, it's also going to have a payoff. So I think the way he thinks about religion is kind of interesting. So anyway, I believe that to understand Wittgenstein, you've got to understand biography. He's the perfect philosopher for that. Somebody once said, well, what about Karl Marx? To understand Marx, you'd have to understand what the industrial life was like in the 1800s, understand what he went through, rather than understand his propositions. So there is some truth to that. But I think Wittgenstein is the perfect example of someone who never could be understood in department, where the professor is going to say, what is the argument? What is Wittgenstein's argument? Like that has anything to do with anything. What you have to understand is what is going on in his head. What is it like to have this autistic personality? What is it like to be him?
See more of Dr. Wilson's lectures here.
Go to SeanWilson.us.